So, the Isha Upanishad is said to be the foundational text of Vedanta, which explores the nature of self. We might unveil its practical applications for navigating our lives with greater awareness and peace. Our presenter is Russ Law.
Thanks, Tom. And why don't you back up one slide, Jerry? I'll get to that in a second. But I wanted to just start out by saying that the Isha Upanishad it comes to us from ancient India, of course, and it was composed sometime between 800 and 500 BC, according to most scholars. It's kind of the accepted or conventional thought about that, but really no one knows for sure because it was orally transmitted for centuries before it was ever written down. And at least one scholar, Charles Johnson, finds within it suggestions of a far greater antiquity. It is one of the shortest of the Upanishads, consisting of only 18 verses. And I just wanted to read a couple sentences before we get to this quote. I wanted to read a couple sentences from the introduction to, or the forward rather, to a recently published collection of Charles Johnson's translations and commentaries on the Upanishads. And I think this very important point is made here, and I thought we should read it before we get into the actual verses of the Isha Upanishad. He says, it says here that the teachings of the Upanishad appeal largely to the intuitive side of our nature, to the inner discerner, the silent voice of recognition within, and not solely to the strict logic of our intellect. There are stories and parables, metaphors and symbols, poetry verging on song, speaking not to our brains alone, but to our hearts. And so we need perhaps to, as we move through these verses, going to put a damper on our left brain, our left hemisphere, so to speak. The Sanskrit word Isha translates into English as Lord or Master or Sovereign. It is very closely related to the word Ishvara, which can be seen as the Atma, or the divine spirit in man. The central theme, the essential teaching of the Isha Upanishad is the fundamental identity of that divine presence within every man and woman, with the Logos, with the universal consciousness, with the self of all. And it touches on the themes of renunciation, of acting for and as the self of all creatures, of acting in the world while not being of the world. And it is addressed to disciples, to those who have undertaken the search for truth, the search for self-knowledge. Now, Charles Johnston was a theosophist and a Sanskrit scholar who translated many of the Upanishads. And he wrote in one of his commentaries on the Isha Upanishad that it was the only Upanishad written in verse. And he says, what magnificent verse it is in the original, full of deep rolling music and fire, such sonorous melody as no translator could hope to recover in any modern version. One gains the conviction that it is the hymn of some grand ceremony of the great enlightening in the strong days of old, in the heart of some long vanished race. And to kind of to introduce us to the verses, I want to have mention a comment made by Mohandas Gandhi that seems pretty interesting concerning the Isha Upanishad. And he said this at a public gathering of his fellow Hindus. He said, I have fixed upon one mantra that I am going to recite to you as containing the whole essence of Hinduism. Many of you, I think, know the Isha Upanishad. I read it years ago with translation and commentary. I learned it by heart a year after jail. I have now come to the final conclusion that if all the Upanishads and all the other scriptures happened all of a sudden to be reduced to ashes, and if only the first verse in the Isha Upanishad were left intact in the memory of Hindus, that Hinduism would live forever. So that's quite a statement, isn't it? And so let's take a look at that first verse. I'll bring in a few translations as it helps us to see how the translations differ in the very difficult task of rendering Sanskrit into English. But first, let's consider how Gandhi translated it himself. This is the first verse of the Isha Upanishad. And Shobha will read it for us.
The Lord is enshrined in the hearts of all. The Lord is the supreme reality. Rejoice in him through renunciation. Covet nothing. All belongs to the Lord.
And we'll look at two other translations of this same initial verse of the Isha Upanishad.
Verse 1. By the Master, all this is to be clothed and pervaded. Whatever moves in this moving world. Through this renounced, thou shalt enjoy. Covet not the wealth of any. Charles Johnston translation. Verse 1. All this whatsoever moves on earth is to be hidden in the Lord, the Self. When thou hast surrendered all this, then thou mayest enjoy. Do not covet the wealth of any man. Max Muller translation.
Thanks, Shobha. And then I found that this brought to mind this verse from the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 20, or chapter 10 rather. I am the self, or the Atman, abiding in the hearts of all beings. And then I also, it brought to my mind this other verse from the Voice of the Silence. The light from the one master, the one unfading golden spirit, the golden light of spirit shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the very first. Its rays thread through the thick, dark clouds of matter. I thought it would be interesting to read what Gandhi said in this meeting that we quoted from earlier. I don't want to read the whole thing, of course, but he has some interesting things about renunciation, and kind of at the conclusion of his remarks, which I thought it would be interesting to consider. He said, the act of renunciation of everything is not a mere physical renunciation, but represents a second or new birth. It is a deliberate act, not done in ignorance. It is therefore a regeneration. And then, since he who holds the body must eat and drink and clothe himself, he must naturally seek all that he needs from him. And he gets it as a natural reward of that renunciation. As if this was not enough, the mantra closes with this magnificent thought: do not covet anybody's possession. The moment you carry out these precepts, you become a wise citizen of the world, living at peace with all that lives. It satisfies one's highest aspirations on this earth and hereafter. Here are three translations of the second verse. We'll move on to that now. Could we bring those up? There we go.
Verse 2.
Yeah, go ahead, Shobha. We can read these three different translations of verse 2.
Max Muller. Though a man may wish to live 100 years, performing works, it will be thus with him, but not in any other way. Work will thus not cling to a man. Charles Johnston. Toiling, therefore, here at his tasks, let him be willing to live 100 ages. This is it with thee, and not otherwise. Nor does work smear and befoul the man. Sri Aurobindo. Doing verily works in this world, one should wish to live 100 years. Thus it is in thee and not otherwise than this. Action cleaves not to the man.
Yeah. So, taking to heart that attitude of renunciation as given in the first verse, we should be willing to continue our tasks and our duties for ages to come. There is nothing about thus working in the world that will bind us karmically with that attitude of mind and heart. Johnson, in his commentary, finds a close parallel to the opening statements of Light on the Path, which says, kill out ambition, yet work as those who are ambitious. Ambition being, we could say, the simplest form of looking for reward, which is kind of the opposite of renunciation. The next four verses are further elaborations, and I'll just apply the Charles Johnson translations of these, which Shobha will read for us.
Verses 3 to 6. Sunless verily are those worlds, by blind darkness enwrapped. They enter into those worlds on going forth. The men who are slayers of their own souls. Without moving, that one is swifter than mind. Nor did the bright powers overtake it. It went swiftly before them. That outstrips the others, though they run, while it stands still. In that Mararisvan, the wind, the moving spirit, disposes the life streams. That moves not. That is afar off. That is as if near. That is within all this. That is outside all this. But he who beholds all beings in the Supreme Self, Atma, and in all beings beholds the Supreme Self, does not seek to hide himself from that.
Thank you. Isn't it so that while we can often kind of feel the truth behind these ancient utterances, it seems impossible to nail it down, to put our finger on the meaning. It just continues to resonate and grow. At one level, paradox, of which this Upanishad serves up a great many indeed. And paradox can be bewildering. But on a higher level, it sets the mind free. It gives space to the intuition. And one needs to dwell in the poetry and to ponder it deeply. This must necessarily be the case when we try to form any kind of conception of the universal self, which is paradoxically referred to in the Mandukya Upanishad as unthinkable and unspeakable, beyond the range and reach of human thought. Without moving, that one is swifter than mind. The seventh verse of the Isha Upanishad was especially cherished by William Q. Judge, who was a prominent figure in the Theosophical movement, one of the co-founders of the Theosophical Society in New York in 1875. And he uses it here and there in his writing, such as this sage piece of advice from Letters That Have Helped Me, where he says, "Then regret nothing, not even the greatest follies of your life, for they are gone, and you are to work in the present, which is both past and future at once, with a firm reliance ever upon karma as the only judge, which will be good or bad as you make it yourself. You can stand anything that may happen and feel serene, despite the occasional despondencies which all feel, but which the light of truth always dispels. This verse always settles everything. In him who knows that all spiritual beings are the same in kind with the Supreme Being, what room can there be for delusion? And what room for sorrow when he reflects upon the unity of spirit?" That is the seventh verse of the Isha Upanishad. And here are two other translations of that same verse. Shobha, would you like to read those for us?
Sure. Verse 7. When to a man who understands the self has become all things, what sorrow, what trouble can there be to him who once beheld that unity? Max Muller. In whom all beings have become as the self of the enlightened. What delusion is there? What sorrow for him beholding oneness? Charles Johnston.
I found this verse practically identical in meaning to one we find in the Bhagavad Gita in the 9th chapter, where Krishna declares to Arjuna, "But for those who thinking of me as identical with all and constantly worship me, I bear the burden of the responsibility of their happiness." So from this perspective, what is the source of our doubts, of our sorrows, our troubles and fears? What prevents us from apprehending the wisdom of these verses and such that it becomes an immediate and compelling reality? Well, it would follow that it is our lack of understanding or recognition of our unity with the self of all. It is our attachments and our identification with our personalities and our circumstances. We tend to think and act as if our well-being and our happiness derive from our accomplishments and the attainment of our desires, the fulfillment of our ambitions, or from finding just the right conditions which will bring comfort and security. But in fact, these are all fleeting and temporary, and once they are attained, if they are attained, they give way to still further desires. And renunciation is the letting go of all that. HBB tells us in her article, Spiritual Progress, the main cause of pain lies in our perpetually seeking the permanent in the impermanent. And not only seeking, but acting as if we had already found the unchangeable in a world of which the one certain quality we can predicate is constant change. And always, just as we fancy we have taken a firm hold upon the permanent, it changes within our very grasp and pain results. Here are two translations of the deeply mysterious 8th verse.
Okay. Verse 8, Max Muller. He, the self, encircled all, bright, incorporeal, scatheless, without muscles, pure, untouched by evil, a seer, wise, omnipresent, self-existent. He disposed all things rightly for eternal years. And then Charles Johnston. He circled around the bright, bodiless, woundless, without tendons, pure, unpierced by evil, the wise poet, all encircling, self-being, disposing ends through perpetual ages.
And looking at different commentaries on this, this is a very difficult verse, and I found that what Charles Johnson had to say about it, I think, was as helpful as anything, and we'll read that. The power which circled around the bright, bodiless, woundless ether, or rather the Akasha, is called in the Trans-Himalayan schools Fohat, who is described as running circular errands. These same paths of circulation universal from the greatest to the least, which have just been indicated. Bohat is called the wise poet, the seer, for in Sanskrit, the one word covers both thoughts. This power of the Logos is the poet of the star systems, of the galaxies, of the suns, and of all organized life through all these systems, where all is life. This wise poet disposes all purposes and aims, and the whole substance of being with infinite wisdom throughout perpetual ages.
Mm.
Here again is the poetry, and I think this kind of calls to mind one of those stanzas that Laura referred to in the Secret Doctrine regarding the emergence of the universe and these intelligent forces being called forth and stirring the universe into manifestation. Now the next 6 verses, verses 9 through 14, present us a series of really wondrous paradoxes. And I'm going to take them all together because they're all of a piece. And I don't know who did this translation, but it seemed like an especially good one. And I thought before we read it, I think it's good to keep in mind this declaration by Krishna that we find in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. He says, "The subject of the Vedas is the assemblage of the 3 qualities. Be thou free from these qualities, O Arjuna. Be free from the pairs of opposites and constant in the quality of sattva, free from worldly anxiety and the desire to preserve present possessions, self-centered and uncontrolled by objects of mind or sense." So let's read these with that kind of in mind, and we'll discuss them a bit.
Verses 9 to 11. Into blind darkness enter they that worship ignorance. Into darkness greater than that, as it were, they that delight in knowledge. Other, indeed, they say, than knowledge. Other, they say, than non-knowledge. Thus we have heard from the wise, who to us have explained it. Knowledge and non-knowledge. He who this pair conjointly knows, with non-knowledge passing over death, with knowledge wins the immortal.
You can continue if you would.
I don't see. Okay. Into blind darkness enter they who worship non-becoming. Into darkness greater than that, as it were, they who delight in becoming. Other, indeed, they say, than origin. Other, they say, than non-origin. Thus have we heard from the wise, who to us have explained it. Becoming and destruction. He who this pair conjointly knows, with destruction passes over death, with becoming wins the immortal.
Thank you. Well, this is certainly engaging poetry, even though we probably will never fully comprehend it. Um, how is it that delight in knowledge leads to a greater darkness than the worship of ignorance? How are we to understand that? Uh, well, one way of looking at this, it was suggested by some of the commentaries, is that the ignorance referred to might pertain to the mere performance of good deeds and rituals without having any knowledge. And the knowledge referred to pertains to the worship of knowledge for its own sake and apart from the performance of work in the world. Uh, that worship of knowledge, in that sense, can lead to a greater darkness insofar as it leads to pride and a sense of superiority or separateness from our fellow human beings. We really need to find that balance. As true wisdom of a spiritual kind can only come from engagement in the world in conjunction with the proper attitude of selfless service, of non-attachment and renunciation of any desire for reward. In that respect, we have these passages from the Voice of the Silence that kind of help to shed some light on that. If thou art told that sin is born of action and bliss of absolute inaction, then tell them that they err. Deliverance of mind from thraldom by the cessation of sin and faults are not for deva egos. Both action and inaction may find room in thee, thy body agitated, thy mind tranquil, thy soul as limpid as a mountain lake. Shalt thou abstain from action? Not so shall gain thy soul her freedom. To reach nirvana, one must reach self-knowledge, and self-knowledge is of loving deeds the child. We have another perspective on these passages given to us by Vinoba Bhabha. He was a close friend and colleague of Mohandas Gandhi, and who continued Gandhi's work in the villages for many years after the assassination. He did his own translation of the Isha Upanishad. And here's a comment he wrote about it in an article he wrote in the 70s. He said, in the Upanishads, the praises of ignorance are sung side by side with the praises of knowledge. Man needs not only knowledge, but ignorance too. Knowledge alone or ignorance alone leads him into darkness. But the union of fitting knowledge with fitting ignorance is the nectar of eternity. The world is so filled with the matter of knowledge that men would go mad if they were to attempt to cram all of it into their heads. The ability to forget is just as necessary to us as the ability to remember. Vinoba's wonderful phrase here, the nectar of eternity, brought to mind a statement by Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine pertaining to our evolution, where she speaks of the transformations through manas, or the mind. The transformations owing to the accumulation of our experiences of the finite into the infinite, of the transient into the eternal and absolute. This, we could say, is the process of awakening, of finding meaning and connection, of learning and becoming. It is the working out of karma, the adjustment of cause to an effect that takes place in our minds. It is the synthesis of the opposites, the conjoining of knowledge and ignorance, of destruction and creation. The final verses of the Isha Upanishad present us with a sacred invocation, and maybe you will find them reminiscent, as I did, of the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the vision of the divine form as including all forms. Here is Charles Johnston's translation.
Verses 15 to 18. By a veil as of gold, the face of the real is hidden. O thou shepherd of the flock, Lord of the sun, lift up that veil for the vision of the law of the real. Shepherd and Lord of light, thou only seer, Lord of death, light giver, Son of the Lord of life, send forth thy rays and bring them together. That radiance of thine, thy form most beautiful I behold, the spiritual man in the real world. That am I. My spirit enters the spirit, the immortal, and this body has its end in ashes. O sacrifice, remember. Remember what has been done. O sacrifice, remember. Remember what has been done. O divine fire, lead us by the good path to victory. O bright one, thou who knowest all wisdoms, give us victory over our consuming sin. To thee we offer the highest word of praise.
The spiritual man in the real world, that am I. Such is the message of the Isha Upanishad. Thank you.